All right, today we're jumping into an opinion piece called Gospel Moment. It gives this really specific, faith-based perspective on a pregnancy clinic's mission up in Northern California. So let's break down what the author is really trying to say here. So the article kicks off with this really powerful image, right? It's designed to put you right there in the room. By painting this picture of a young woman who's scared and unsure, the author is basically saying, hey, this isn't some abstract idea we're talking about. For them, it all starts with a real person facing a huge, life-changing moment. Okay, so how do you get from that very personal, individual crisis to this big, overarching spiritual mission? Well, the author lays out what they call the gospel framework. This is really the theological foundation for everything else they're about to argue. And this is the verse they build their entire case on. This specific passage from Matthew is presented as, essentially, a direct order, a call to action for believers, to take care of people who need help, the hungry, the thirsty, the outsider. And this is the key connection the article makes. The author says, look, these aren't just old words from a book. They're living instructions for right now. And they specifically frame a vulnerable pregnant woman and her unborn child as the modern-day version of the hungry, the thirsty, and the stranger. They're saying the command applies directly to them. And this last line, this is what really seals the deal for the author's argument. They use this to say that helping a mother and child in this situation isn't just a nice thing to do. In their view, it's the same as serving Jesus directly. So it shifts the whole thing from being about charity to being about, a really deep act of faith. Okay, so that's the whole spiritual why behind it all. But what does that actually look like in the real world? How does that belief turn into action? Well, the article pivots here to talk about a specific organization that's doing exactly that. The group at the center of this whole article is the NorthState Care Clinic. And according to the author, they've been around for a while. We're talking over 40 years of work in Shasta County, California. And their mission statement, as it's quoted in the article, is super direct. It's just to glorify God by valuing every life. That one line really sums up that mix of faith and real-world action the author's been talking about. So what does valuing every life actually mean in practice? Well, the article lists out a bunch of free and confidential services they offer. It's a pretty wide range, from the medical side of things, like verified pregnancy tests and limited ultrasounds, to really practical long-term support, like parenting classes, diapers, baby supplies, and connecting people with other resources in the community. The article is also really upfront about where the clinic stands on abortion. It says they provide counseling on alternatives like adoption, but that they absolutely do not provide or refer for abortion services. The author's framing of this is that they're offering practical hope so that fear gives way to courage. And it's not just about their main location. The article points out they're trying to expand their reach. They have a mobile unit to get out to more rural areas, and it also mentions they're opening a new brick-and-mortar location. And the location is pretty strategic, right across the street from an abortion provider. All right, before we get to the end of the article, it's probably a good idea to know a little bit about where it was published, for context. So let's take a quick look at the publication itself. So this gospel moment piece that we're digging into, it comes from a publication called Shasta Unfiltered. They describe themselves as a source for news and entertainment that serves California's NorthState region. Okay, so with that context, let's get back to the article's grand finale. After laying out the whole theological why and the practical how, the author switches gears and makes a direct pitch to the reader for them to get involved. And this call to action is framed as something way bigger than just, donating to a local charity. The author presents it as a chance to be part of that gospel moment they talked about. So every little bit, a prayer, a donation, an hour of your time, is described as having this deep spiritual meaning, connecting right back to that Bible verse from the beginning. And they don't leave it vague. The article lays out 4 really specific things it's asking readers to do. First, to pray for the women in the clinic. Second, to give money to support the mission. Third, to actually volunteer their time. And finally, to just spread the word and share the clinic's story. So how does it all wrap up? What's the final takeaway? The author takes all these different pieces, that initial story, the scripture, the clinic's work, and that call to action, and ties them all together for one big closing thought. And in the end, the article just drives home its main point one last time. From the author's perspective, supporting this clinic and these women is a tangible way to show love to God. And this work is framed as the kind of thing that leads to that ultimate spiritual pat on the back, well done, my good and faithful servant. And that's pretty much the Gospel Moment article in a nutshell. It's a very clear, very faith-focused take on a pretty complex issue in the community. And it kind of leaves you with a bigger question to chew on, right? What role do these hyper-local, faith-based groups really play when it comes to tackling community health challenges? No matter what the community is or what their specific beliefs are, it's definitely something to think about.